Hey folks, it's Dan Wilson, and I'm with Blues Wireless. We're the fastest path to cellular IoT. And today we're talking to Brandon Satrom, VP of Developer Experience at Blues Wireless. How you doing, Brandon?
Doing great, Dan. How are you?
I'm great. Give us the who you are and what you do.
So yeah, as Dan said, I'm the Vice President of Developer Experience for Blues Wireless. So my day-to-day responsibility is just making sure that as new developers and customers come to our tools, that they have everything that they need to be successful. So that's everything from content to docs to telling people why the products are important and how to use them, and just in general, how we go to market with our products.
Sounds like quite the handful. So you were recently at the IoT Evolution Expo in Miami and participated in a panel called Smart Cities Reveal Revenue Opportunities. Can you give us an idea of what deployment technologies were discussed during your panel?
Yeah, it's a great question. So typically with smart city applications, a lot of the deployment conversation centers around four different options. I mean, that really encompasses the options that are available for any IoT application today. But Ethernet and Wi-Fi tend to be the first two that are typically always talked about and considered. And then and LoRaWAN, and finally cellular. And really all four of those technologies, they have their strengths and weaknesses, but there was a good representation on the panel of folks that are doing smart city deployments with LoRa, myself representing more of a cellular and heterogeneous point of view, and then a couple of folks that advocate for using Ethernet and Wi-Fi, depending on the type of application that you're building. So good cross section of content and folks.
And from where you were stationed up there, what was your perspective on the room? How did they receive these different deployment technologies, and what were their preferences that they shared during the show?
I think one of the biggest things is cost. I mean, when you're planning a smart city application or a smart building application, if you're a building owner, if you are, heading up a municipality that's working on a new project, one of the things that there are really two things on your mind. First is, how am I going to pay for this thing? And the second is, how am I going to make my money back, either through ongoing revenue, taxpayer dollars, whatever it might be. But cost is an ever-present consideration. And historically, what has happened is people tend to look at things like Wi-Fi and Ethernet and they think, oh, okay, well, that's just free, so I guess I can use that. That has a couple of different problems. One, and this showed up in the conversation. One is with Ethernet and Wi-Fi both, you tend to be restricted to a building, right? You can't really do a smart city application off of Wi-Fi or Ethernet necessarily unless you've built broadband Wi-Fi for an entire municipality, and that's not very widely deployed at this point. And so typically you're sort of isolated into one location. And in addition, in both Wi-Fi and Ethernet, you're sharing a network with other unknown access points or other unknown devices on a network. So it becomes a full-time job in and of itself to monitor and maintain the network for security threats, and just to make sure that your smart city project doesn't get taken over for nefarious purposes by some anonymous hacker group overseas or something along those lines. And so what tends to happen a lot of times is people then tend to shift their attitude towards LoRa and LoRaWAN or cellular. And historically, cellular has been a bit of a good news, bad news situation, right? The good news about cellular for most smart city projects is that the towers are already there. The infrastructure has been deployed. If it's a city you can use your cell phone in, by and large, it's a city that can also support a narrowband or even wideband IoT deployment using cellular technology. So it's already there. The problem, on the other hand, is that cellular solutions tend to get priced like mini cell phone plans, right? Cellular IoT data plans end up being like the old MMS add-ons that we had to have on all of our cell phone plans. You had to sort of account for this per device fee just to have a certain number of megabytes. And if you went over that, you got charged an overage fee, or they locked off the device till the end of the month. And so it has traditionally been very difficult for deployers to be able to really plan what their costs are going to be. And so again, harkening back to my point of a few moments ago, if you're building a smart city application and you're worried about cost, you've tended to look away from cellular. Now, LoRa, on the other hand, tends to be seen as, well, once you've deployed it, it's free. You can use it. You're building something on unlicensed spectrum, but there's a cost associated, right? You're not just connecting a sensor to a cellular tower like you are with cellular. You're connecting a sensor to a gateway, and many times you have to build the gateway or buy the gateway yourself. You have to deploy one gateway per building, or maybe one gateway every 5 or 6 floors, depending on what sort of penetration you're getting from the solution. So it's one of those cases where the infrastructure cost in LoRa tends to be its drawback or its disadvantage. And so I think where we ended the panel was really two interesting takeaways. One is that business models around cellular really are changing. Blues Wireless is one example of this for sure, but there are others where with the product that we provide, the cellular plan is included with the cost of the device. So when you're building your smart city application, when you're trying to create the spreadsheet that defines your actual cost around 50 or 100 or 1,000 devices, you know what that's going to cost you for 10 years because it's written on the tin, right? It's $49, 500 megs, 10 years of cellular service. You don't have to worry about activation and deactivation charges. So you can actually use the infrastructure that's already there for that sort of an application. But the other takeaway is that these deployment options are not necessarily mutually exclusive. It's actually becoming increasingly common for customers to look at LoRa with cellular as the backhaul, right? LoRa is only going to give you a building to building solution or one side of the city to the other side of the city. It's not going to get intelligence to the cloud. So if you're wanting to build dashboards where you're remotely monitoring a building or a city deployment or something along those lines, LoRa by itself isn't going to do anything for you. You need some way of actually backhauling. And so cellular is a great case for this. Ethernet and Wi-Fi as well, if you're in a place where the gateway is deployed where you can actually do that. So it was a big important takeaway is really, it depends very largely on your use case and what you're trying to do, but these technologies don't have to be mutually exclusive. A lot of times they can be used together, not only in pair, but even in backup cases where you start with Wi-Fi and back up to cellular or what have you. So it really, you could say it's an it depends thing, but it's not. It's really, you can sort of pick and choose based on what you're trying to build in your application.
That's fantastic. So it sounds like smart cities implementers and operators should be aware of all these deployment technologies and pick and choose the right combinations to meet their actual use cases. Brandon,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for your time today, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.